Go ahead and get started here, and I think today we'll start with some introductions. We'd like to just go around the room. We'll start on the outside wall over here, Thad Ballard. Just tell us who you are, who you're with, and you can let us know if you're an irrigator if you want to or not, and that way everybody will get an idea who's here. Go ahead, Thad.
Thad Ballard, Director of Owner Services for Wells Rural, and I'm glad so many of you came today. It's awesome to have you here.
And you're not getting out of this, Spencer. We're going to backtrack to Spencer.
I'm Spencer Black. I'm with Farmore of Idaho. I'm in the sales and service end of things. So, what you're talking about today, if you have questions as far as on the sales end of it or who to get it from, just visit with me, and I'll take about 10 minutes or so when these guys are done.
Thank you.
I'm Tony Wasco. I'm also with Farmore in the store. A lot of you talk to me on the phone when you call, and like UPS ship parts. Kind of taking over for Joe.
I'm John Reed, and from Pine Valley with Tom Tamara, and we deal with Wells Rural Electric down there.
Okay.
Paul Terry from Wells here, and I irrigate some and try to sell some.
He sells quite a bit.
Alan Sharp, Ruby Valley.
Thanks, Alan.
Tom Tamara from Tamara out there in Pine Valley, and I'm an irrigator if it rains. I'm an irrigator, you know.
Even in the dry years, his place is green, so.
Steve Neff from Ruby Valley. I'm an irrigator too.
Jim Whited from Ruby Valley, or from Clover Valley. I'm an irrigator too. I wanted to say Ruby Valley because I'm also a director on the board. So when it comes up on the rate schedule, don't share all your hostility with Thad and Scott, and I'll take part of the brunt of it too.
We appreciate that. You can give him the majority of the brunt. I'm willing to let it go, Jim. Go ahead.
Howard Niebling with University of Idaho, irrigation engineer.
Flesh Windeman with Bonneville Power, and I'm not an irrigator.
Dick Stroh, Bonneville Power Administration out of Idaho Falls, and I am an irrigator.
Great, Dick. Good dad.
Jeanette Ritchie, Wells Rural Electric. I'm over the billing. I've probably talked to most people on the phone at one time or another.
Be kind to her when you talk to her.
I'm the CFO with Wells Rural Electric. My name is Buddy Welsh. Steve Neff and I graduated Wells High School together.
Long time ago.
That explains it.
I'm Enoch Dahl, Wells Rural Electric, their Director of Finance Administration.
Mike Rodriguez, I'm with Wells Rural Electric, one of their electricians.
I'm Brian Runyon. I work for Jim Boyer out in Independence Valley, and so we're putting new pivots in and have a lot of irrigation going on.
Yeah.
Tom Pelini from Pelini Farm.
Brad Dalton, Clover Valley, irrigator.
Steve Safford, Clover Valley. Spread some water around out there too.
Jackie Bailey from Pine Valley, Bailey Ranches, we irrigate.
Walt Howell from Howell Ranches in Star Valley. We're an irrigator.
Layla Waltz from Wells Rural Electric. Don't have any ranches or any irrigation. I'm really envious. I want to be able to announce myself as Waltz Ranches. That would be really cool.
I'm Jeff Cromie. I've dealt with a lot of the different sectors of our rebates program here at Wells Rural Electric. I'm pretty new to the irrigation side of things, but I'm excited about learning about it and working with Dick over there on some of your projects, and so thanks for being here today.
Jeff has a real good job in that no one ever gets mad at him because he's always handing checks back. So that's why he's smiling.
Yeah, we get to give you money back.
Albert Frainer from Ruby Valley, my irrigator.
I'm Jared Neff from Ruby Valley. I'm an irrigator.
Kirk Dahl, Ruby Valley.
Jason Pengelly, City of Wells, we're irrigators.
They irrigate all the people in the city.
We appreciate it.
City of Wells.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm Scott Egbert, an irrigator when there's water, and on the board of directors for Wells Rural Electric. So we're good to have you. It's good to have all of you here. We're happy that you've come. I'm supposed to hand this out, and it's an irrigator's workshop questionnaire. If there's anything on here about the first speaker, fill it out right now, and then we can fill out the rest a little bit later, but if you just, let me give you, those there, just pass those around, and we'll start some.
Yeah.
Back row. If you run out, maybe the front row and the back row some, or vice versa, then that would be fantastic. So, just to begin with, I'd like to talk to you just a little bit about some of the things that your board of directors is working on now, and some of the issues and concerns that we have as a board of directors for Wells Rural Electric. Just the issues that are coming up, and one of the key things for us that we are seeing, that we're being pulled into, I think I would say, more than ever, and I mentioned this a little bit last year, is the legislative and regulatory side of things. And we are seeing that is causing an increase in costs, probably more than anything else. And even what concerns us even more is the potential of the increases that we could see coming down the road. You know, we had a realignment with some of our congressional districts here in the state, or our assembly districts, and we lost some of our rural representation. And that concerns us. You get a lot of people out of Las Vegas and a few out of Reno that are making decisions for us in this rural area, and they just don't understand what we deal with. They don't understand the distances, they don't understand the costs, and so they make decisions based on their knowledge from their experience in their world. And so what's happening, what we're seeing is happening to us, is that we're, in order to protect the viability of the business, we have to go and make friends with these individuals, form alliances with them, even though they may be out of Las Vegas, so that we have the opportunity to talk to them and educate them about our concerns and the decisions that they make. So they realize, most of these people, we found out, you know, they're not out there to purposely hurt us. They make decisions based on what they know, and if they don't know what the effect is going to be in our area, then they think they've made a good decision, and really they haven't. And so we're actually having to put out a lot more employee time to go visit with legislators, to spend time with them. The board members are doing the same thing, and we're trying to build these relationships with these individuals. On a regional level, we find ourselves joining more organizations that can help us get to legislators in states other than our own, and that our voice might be heard in those other areas. I just spent 3 days this last week in Vancouver, Washington, working with a group, NWPPA, and they represent the northwestern United States. We've aligned ourselves with them so that we have a voice. They have a very active, what's the word I'm looking for here? A very active group that lobbies to some extent, but works directly with legislators. And they also have a good educational portion of this organization that teaches and trains us as board members, and trains a lot of our employees on different issues as well. But for them, the government relations side of things has become very big. And because they cover such a large area, we now have representation. Our voice can be heard in 9 or 10 different states here in the Northwest. And they have a very good lobbying group in Washington, D.C. that's very highly respected. And so we find ourselves aligning with these individuals, and that costs money to do that. It just does. It costs money to be part of the organization. It costs money to make the trips. But we feel if we don't do this, then we're just left wide open to whatever they decide to do to us. And we don't want that. We want our voice to be heard. And so if you hear about us taking trips to Washington, D.C., or up north somewhere, unfortunately, it's not to go have a lot of fun. I went to DC for the first time last year, and I think I walked 1,000 miles, at least my feet thought they did. We were just constantly moving. We visited with 40 different legislators in 3 days. And so we were moving. And, but we actually made some inroads. We had 3 of them when we left that they were voicing their opinion totally against us, and when we left, they were on our side. They had changed their direction completely. Now, a lot of them were already somewhat aligned to us, and we just helped refine their opinions. So we believe that we are doing the right thing, and that we're making the right decisions, and we're hoping that by doing this, we can keep your costs down. Costs will go up, and fortunately for me, I don't have to share the details of that with you. Any dog gets to do that here in a minute, but we'll talk to you a little bit about those things. One other issue, of course, that we're all dealing with is the sage-grouse issue. That affects us just as much as it affects ranchers. We have the BLM telling us that we're going to need to move our line. If we want to put a line in, we're going to have to move it around a lek. They're telling us that on existing easements, when they come up for renewal, they may not renew them. They may say you're going to have to move them in a different direction, or you're going to have to change the structures themselves to mitigate any impact on the sage-grouse habitat. And that all just comes at a big expense. And we try to explain to them, you're going to cost our members a lot of money. And their reply is, it's the cost of doing business. That's just how they look at it. It's a cost of doing business. So we have to help educate them that is not just a cost of doing business. It affects every individual's life that is in our area. And we have to just stay very involved in that. Some of the outrageous ideas that they've thrown at us are more than doubles the cost of the line. More than doubles. Just with reflectors and things like that on there, you know. So we are involved in all of these issues, and we're very much involved. We just want you to know that. We are starting to see a little bit of an increase in our purchase power costs, the actual price that it costs us, and we'll probably hear a little more of about that today. We want you to know that the amount that you're being charged as a customer of Wells Rural Electric, out of that amount, or out of our entire operating costs, only 15% of the entire bill is because of the operation here at Wells Rural Electric. The other 85% of your bill either comes from power costs or outside costs that we don't have any control over, other than trying to fight the regulations and fight the legislation. And so our employees have the mandate from the board to keep their costs as low as they can. We do our best to try to avoid those, but you will see we've been changing our bills so that you can see a little bit better where these costs are coming from. A lot of them most of them, the majority of them are coming from outside of here. And so and a lot of that, again, is from regulations and legislative issues. We pay a lot of money for the salmon up in the Columbia, and you'll probably hear a little bit about that later, but there's a lot of money spent on that, and we don't have a choice. Legislation was passed, or regulation on it, and then it's up to BPA to fix it. You know, and even though our numbers right now, the salmon runs I just heard the other day are going to be 1 million, they're way over what they've ever been in the past. We have a lot of salmon out there, but that doesn't seem to change things. So before I turn some time over to Enoch Dahl, any questions for me that you might have? And I don't want you to think it's all doom and gloom. I just want you to know we're actually doing something. So we're trying, and we're working hard to keep things so that you guys can stay in business, so we can all stay in business. No further questions? Or no questions? Enoch? I'll turn.
There was a preacher in a little small rural community, and it was in the middle of winter, and he was preparing his sermon and hoping someone would come, and he waited and waited, and nobody came. Finally, this little old rancher showed up, and they waited and waited, and he thought, well, shoot, should I go ahead and give the sermon, or should we just pass? And the rancher said, well, if I took a big load of hay out to feed my horses and only one horse came, I'd still feed him. And the preacher said, that's a great story, so I'll go ahead and give my sermon. So he gave this long sermon, and he went on and on and on, and it seemed like the rancher was really getting a lot out of it, so he just kept going and going and going, and finally at the end he said, well, how did I do? And the rancher kind of said, well, if I took a big load of hay out to my horses and only one came, I sure wouldn't feed him the whole load. Anyway, I'm trying not to feed you the whole load here. There's a lot that could be talked about when it comes to rates. But anyway, what would your fields look like without irrigation? Over the last couple of years, you probably feel like it looks a little more like this than the lush green that you see over in the other picture. Obviously, with irrigation, as you drive through the valleys, you can see the difference that it makes when we irrigate. After the last couple of years, you probably feel like some of your ground looks like this. As far as our rates, I want to keep it fairly simple. Last year, we called all of our irrigators that were affected by this, and hopefully, I think between 4 of us here in the office, we got a hold of everybody. And the board decided to break the irrigation class into 2 groups. The 60 horsepower pumps and smaller were in one group, and then the 60 horsepower or above 60 horsepower into our large irrigation. Really the difference, if there are some that are 60 horse that may go both directions, really the difference is in the size of transformer. If you have a 50 kVA transformer or larger, you will be in the large irrigation group. On the smaller group, our energy rate, that's your kilowatt hour rate, is 0.06333 per kilowatt hour. There's not a demand charge. And then your customer charge, which is an annual charge, is $417.76. I'm going to pass out if you want to take one of these and pass them. Well,
You want some help?
yeah. Maybe I'll send this one this direction. There's 2 that look the same, so one is for the smaller rate group and one is for the larger rate group. For the larger size of pump. As far as the large irrigation class, the energy charge is 0.04905 per kilowatt hour. The demand charge is $7.95. The customer charge or annual service charge is $1,550.49. In the rate tariff, there is a breakdown or an option based on the time of year that you're pumping from September through April. Really, it runs August 25th through April 25th. There is not a demand charge, and your kilowatt hour rate jumps to 0.06897. This last sheet that I have to pass around. This is a calendar of the time of year when you are billed for demand versus time of year when you're not. So if you're going to do pump testing or you're going to move a pivot, obviously you want to get that done in that off season between September and April when you aren't billed for that demand. Does everyone know how demand works on your bill. What that is, I'll discuss here just a little bit. Your demand is billed at its peak demand for the month. So we typically read your irrigation meters around the 25th of each month. So from the 25th of the month to the 25th of the next month, whatever your peak demand is, that means the highest point of demand that your system has, you will be billed for that. You'll multiply that times your 7.95. So you're not being billed for demand every single day. It's only based on whenever you peak. So when I say that if you're going to do pump testing or you're going to move a pivot or something like that, you want to try to get that done prior to that April 25th date, because from April 25th to August 25th, you'll be charged for your demand. The other times throughout the rest of the year, you won't be billed for demand. You do have the option of staying with that demand and the normal kilowatt hour rate. I believe the break-even point is if you pump for at least 15 days out of the month, I believe that's the break-even point. So if you're pumping less than that, then you're probably better off staying at that normal rate and paying the demand. If you're pumping over that, then you're probably better off taking that higher kilowatt hour rate and not paying the demand. Does anyone have any questions on demand or how that part works? So again, here's the calendar. I passed that out. So basically, from the 25th of April through the 25th of August is when you were billed for demand and then the regular kilowatt hour rate. Hopefully, we get more of this, more rain, because that obviously be good for everyone. Are there any questions, comments, constructive criticism? Or it just sounds good, everyone's excited? Yes, sir.
When you were talking about the different rates,
Uh-huh.
and you could choose which one you wanted, when do you have to make that decision?
If you let us know,
I mean,
really,
if you get your bill, can you make it then, or?
No, if you let us know, really, we're going into, the new rate takes effect April 25th. And so if you let us know prior to that, obviously through the summer months, there's not really a choice. You can't take the higher kilowatt hour rate and not pay the demand.
I think if they let us know near the end of the pumping season, we can make that adjustment.
So let us know, towards the end of August. Let us know. Tom?
Now, like on the 60 horsepower or less or 60 or better, not like our booster pump, if they're all feeding out of the same meter, say we got 125 horsepower well pump, but then you've got 15 horsepower booster or 35, that all go towards 125, are they accumulated?
They are.
Whatever's on the pumping system.
Yeah, it's based on the transformer that's feeding those pumps.
Okay.
So the transformer size, if you've got multiple horsepower, like if you've got a 35 and an 85 and the aggregate requires a 50 kVA transformer or larger to supply the power, then you'd be in that larger rate class. Yeah. The only difference would be if you had a smaller pump that was on its own service, that fit in that smaller category. Yeah.
For some individuals, depending on how you're using it, if you're using one of those smaller ones for stock water or something like that, or the city of Wells, they're going through this fix right now also, it may actually be cheaper to have another meter to run those smaller ones and pay that facility charge than to pay the big charge running the big pumps. For most ranchers, that's probably not the case, but it is for cities, and it could be for somebody if they had stock water pump hooked to that as well.
Right. In fact, tomorrow,
Yeah.
we're going out to meet with Jason to look at a couple of their setups with some of the wells here in Wells to determine if it would be more cost effective to split out some of the lights and heaters that are on that one service, because they're receiving a demand charge each month even though they're not pumping, and the usage isn't such, the demand isn't such that if it's separated out, would be more cost effective in some instances.
That's a system we got. We got our transformer down off the 480 down to 240 to run the submersible off of a well pump, off a well pump transformer. So we would be paying, we only got like 3/4 horsepower submersibles. Are we paying the demand charge on the greater than 60 horsepower? Because our well pumps, well, they're all 100 to 125 horsepower, they're in the upper one. But like say with that transformer that reduces down to 240, we're still feeding out of the same bank,
Right.
Going through the same meter also?
Yeah. And they
You
just,
ought to take a look at
and
it.
we run them all winter, pretty much, they're our stop water.
Did we do any pump testing out there last year at all? So would, I'm getting, anybody who hasn't had pump testing that wants to, I'm gonna be scheduling Dick Stroh to come down here this pumping season, and we can, before you leave today, let me know and we'll get you on the list and we can schedule looking at that. And while we're there, we can also look at the cost effectiveness of that.
Yeah, we can give you a cost breakdown of what it would cost to separate, whether it's a pump or whatever, and put it on a separate meter, on a separate transformer that would be a smaller transformer that would put you in that different rate class. We can
Cause like I
give you a
said there,
cost on that.
well, on there, we would be off the demand period because, it'd be like from middle of September till the 1st of April or whatever is when we're using the stop water, getting cattle off the creek and stop water. But then when we're irrigating the cattle out, so the submersibles are down, but the irrigation starts up, so.
Right.
So we just have to look at how much it would cost you to put in that separate service to separate that out, and then you can decide if it's worth it for you or not to do
It
that.
probably wouldn't be, I don't know.
Yeah, we can look at that for you.
We could also do an
We'd have to run a
analysis of,
separate meter and a separate transformer and probably a separate pole too, huh?
Yeah, it's a service, it'd be a separate service.
if it's only something he uses in the winter, he's probably better off just the way he is.
Right.
Because in the winter, you're just paying a kilowatt hour charge.
You're not paying the demand on that anyway,
Yeah.
so it may not pencil out that way.
But it never
But
hurts to.
yeah, we
to
can
run
look
it,
at that though, that's not.
See what the comparison is, and if it makes sense, then, pull the trigger on it.
Well, thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Those are good questions. Appreciate those.
You're way too easy on Enid for, you just raise your rates and you're not even growing.
We're used to that, everything.
Right.
That's why we put the biggest guy around up there.
Well, I noticed nobody came in with pitchforks or shotguns, so I felt pretty safe. All right, well, thank you for your time, I appreciate that, and if you do have any questions as you get home and get thinking about things, feel free to give us a call. I'd be more than happy to visit with you about your service and what we could do to maybe put you in a better spot, so appreciate your time.
Thank you, Enid. We're going to next hear from Celeste Schwindeman, our BPA representative. And you want to come take the floor? Do you need anything up here, Celeste?
I'm sorry?
Do you need anything?
No, no.
All right, and then you can just introduce the.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me down to speak at this meeting. I really enjoy coming down here and seeing you all every year. I'm going to keep it kind of short today because we are not in a rate case year, which is good news. I know your biggest question for me is, when are you guys going to raise rates, which typically translates to a rate increase from Wells. So we increased rates in October of 2013 which is last year. We won't have another rate increase for 2 years. We have rate adjustments every 2 years. It looks like there will probably be a rate increase to Wells in October of 2015, but we have a little bit of a breather between now and then, which is nice. So not a lot of rate news going on right now, so I thought I'd just dig up a few interesting facts and tell you about also the drivers behind rates. One of the biggest drivers behind our rates currently is the lack of secondary sales. And what that means is that when we have extra power, we sell it on the market, and all the revenues from that sale flow back through to our customers. So when we have low water years, we don't generate a lot of extra power, and we don't have as much secondary sales revenues to lower our rates. That's one of our big drivers for rate increases. Another big driver is our aging infrastructure. So all the dams on the Columbia are really, really old and need quite a bit of maintenance and upgrades, and we're looking at some potential large costs for that, especially going forward. And then, as Scott pointed out, fish and wildlife is a big cost, and it is about 30% of the power bill that we send to Wells Rural Electric every month. So that's also a big driver, and we can probably expect some increases in those costs in the future as well. Do we have any questions about Bonneville's rates? All right. Thanks so much. I'm going to introduce my colleague Dick Stroh, and also Professor Howard Niebling from the University of Idaho, and they're going to give you an update on the Irrigator Energy Efficiency Program. Dick?
Oh, okay. I'll just go through this is about 10-minute part here, and then I'll turn it over to you. So let's see. Okay. What I thought I'd start off with is just an update on our irrigation program offerings for this coming year, some of the changes that are have recently occurred or will be occurring. So, you have handed out the rebate schedule. The main thing to mention here is that there is no change in 2014 in this schedule from last year. This remains the same. Our custom program incentive also, it applies to pumps, motors, mainline fittings, gravity conversion to gravity pressure systems, controls, and again, no changes from 2013. We got a couple examples of the custom projects here. And this was one where we did a retrofit on an existing pumping system, where we went from 2000, originally, the existing system was 300 horsepower, went from 2,924 gallons per minute at 113 PSI. We put in new bowls on this pump, brought it up to 3,470 gallons per minute. Because of the increase in flow, we ended up with a little bit more pressure. It was just a lift pump, is all it was, up to a pond. And yet our power didn't change much. 236, and it actually went down to 234. So the efficiency went from an overall of 62.6 to 77.4. And so in this case, the incentive was $4,200 Annual savings was $46,771, and with the incentive, we have a cost of $84.22. The payback was 1.7 years with the incentive, so fairly quickly. Another project that we did was after we did the audit, I said, boy, we're just not watering this field right. He had wheel lines, and this is before. He actually then put a pivot on, went from wheel lines to a pivot. It was 80 acres, so it's be a half pivot on the 80. But he only had 2 wheel lines for 80 acres. Oh man, he was really trying to stretch that water. We ended up, he had 13 64 nozzles, so big nozzles, putting on lots and lots of water. Out of those 2 wheel lines, he needed to, because where he only had 2 wheel lines. We put the pivot on, putting on then the same amount of water as he had before. Exact same amount. We didn't change anything there. We upgraded the pump because now we could operate at a lower pressure with the pivot. And so the results on that were before with the wheel lines we were at 467 gallons per minute. With the pivot we were at 456. So basically not much change, but we dropped our pressure from 53.6 down to 43.4 since we had the low pressure package. And our efficiency, he just did he did do some, a little bit of work on the pump. We were able to improve the efficiency a little bit from 52.5 up to 57.5. The big change here though, he doubled his yield. So now he wasn't drying out because he was able to get that pivot around quick enough compared to those wheel lines where he dried out in between irrigations. So he was very happy. So some recent and upcoming program changes. First off, scientific irrigation scheduling. We do have irrigation scheduling rebates if any of you are interested. And we're looking, however, at changing those. Another thing that changed are we now allow rebates for conversion to LIPA systems, which we'll talk about in a little bit. There will be an adjustment coming on the VFD rebate on April 1. Our RC&D agreement that we had expired October 1st, so we will not have the expertise from those folks that we had last year. Another big change that's happening is for custom projects. Projects may begin prior to approval. That's new, and that's a big change. And cost effectiveness threshold was removed. That's another big change. That will be happening April 1st. This one, the prior one has already taken place. So on scientific irrigation scheduling, right now we're paying $5.20 per acre. They are considering reducing this incentive in half, however. And so, but no changes right now, but that is potentially on the horizon. Okay, for the variable frequency drives, we are reducing the incentive, the rebate, by 25%, beginning April 1. It'll go from $80 down to $60 a horsepower. And a couple demonstration projects that we're working on. And one is the smart controllers for wheel lines. We're working with NRCS on that project over in the Dalles area, where they will put pressure transducers at the end of wheel lines to control a drive, so that you provide the proper pressure to your wheel line if it's going up or down a hill. So that's something kind of new. And then again, we'll talk about the LIPA program a little bit more. So mentioned that one already. And LIPA, we'll get into that. So those are the main changes. Howard, you had something that you want to mention as well?
I'll just throw a couple things in here. And one of the things that, you know, up our way, we don't have a whole lot of water in some other of our areas ain't either. And so one of the things that we're talking about there is something that seems pretty simple, but I went out and did a field study 2 summers ago with Idaho Power. We tested 30 wheel lines and 30 pivots. On the wheel lines, the average water loss due to leaks was about 12 to 13% of the line capacity. The average loss due to either missing nozzles, the wrong size nozzles, or worn nozzles was another 13%. That was the average for the 30 systems. So you put those two numbers together, the average loss of water on those 30 lines was 25%. That's a lot of water just to be going someplace you don't want it. That's a simple fix, and you know, there's cost incentive available to fix that. That to me is a good starting point for wheel lines. You may be losing more water out there than you think. It's really deceptive. You know, it looks like it's putting out good water, but it may not be. That's a great place to do some water savings. The other part, we looked at 30 pivots. These 30 pivots were primarily low pressure pivots. We put out catch cans every 10 feet under the pivot and ran the pivot across it and looked at the uniformity. Uniformity was low enough on 65% of those pivots that the packages needed replacement. You know, we calculated a uniformity index number, coefficient of uniformity. It was below the industry standard for replacing the application packages. And that enters in as well. You know, if you're not getting good uniformity, well, the wind evens it out some, but still, you know, if you're chemigating or doing anything else, that's a different story. And, you know, we had a number of pivots where the nozzles were in the wrong place, rather significantly in the wrong place. And you saw some parts of some spans that were grossly overwatered and some parts that were underwatered. And so, you know, there's room for improvement there too, in ways that may take a little bit of your time but not a lot of money.
Okay, thank you, Howard. Any questions on our program?
Why the reductions in rebate?
For the drive?
Both of them. The scientific.
Oh, and the scientific irrigation scheduling. Okay, first on the drive. Okay, the reason that we have reduced the incentive on the drive is we initially offered the rebate to get, we knew it was probably going to be more than what really the savings justified. But we wanted to get some drives out there. And then once we got those drives installed, then we started looking at the power bills before and after. We did an evaluation to see what was really justified. And as we predicted, it was more we were offering more than what we had, the savings were. And so we just brought it more into alignment with what is realistic on savings. Now, as far as scheduling, that is a very controversial, and right now, and as far as what happens, we don't know. But there is a technical advisory committee in the Northwest. It's made up of a lot of folks. And they make recommendations as far as for the entire region of what we should be looking at for incentives. They did a study for scheduling to see how much scheduling is going on without any incentives versus with incentives. And what the finding was, and like in southern Idaho, we have, out of our office, we have no utilities participating really in the scheduling portion of this program. We haven't had any cooperators really take advantage of it, even though it is available. And yet, scheduling goes on without those incentives. I talked to one of our irrigation districts, and they said as far as they knew, every single one of their customers scheduled. Potatoes are scheduled, corn is scheduled, all the crops are being scheduled. But no incentives are even needed. And they have seen, they said, as a result of that scheduling, a dramatic reduction in the use of water. So if we don't need to provide it, why then there's no need to be paying the incentive? So what they said was, well, in reality, approximately half of the acres in the Northwest that are scheduled are being done without incentives. And so we don't necessarily need to be providing this level of an incentive to get folks to do it. That's the issue. The counter argument has been, well, maybe only half the acres are being scheduled. Let's try and get the other half. In order to get the other half, we need to maybe provide some incentive to do it. And so there's a debate going on of whether or not that gets changed. That's where we are with it. Thank you. Yes?
In one of your examples that you gave, you reworked the bowls
Yes.
of the pump. Is there a rebate available if you are to do that?
Yeah.
To rework
So
the bowls?
yeah, this is what we generally do is we'll come out, we'll want to evaluate your current pump. How efficient is it? Then if you decide to rebuild that pump, then we'll come back and we'll test it again. Now, if you put, and then we'll pay based on the savings. If you decide to put in a new pump, we'll handle that a little bit differently. And a new pump, we're pretty well assured of how well it's going to perform. It's going to perform pretty darn close to what the design specifications are for that pump. And we can then predict what the savings are ahead of time and determine your incentive ahead of time. So that way you are assured of what you're going to get before you make the investment. And so that's something that a lot of times is rather helpful to know and encourages you to go ahead and make the take the extra step and put in a brand new pump.
So if you've already done the work, then you've lost the chance.
I can't say that anymore.
Yeah, well, now you could, under the new thing, you can, that's what I was gonna ask, is
Yeah.
how critical, how do you go back and get what the
Yeah, if
efficiency
we
was
can,
before?
if we can, calculate what the savings are, from what you had, so maybe we could go off your billing history, do something like that. That's a little hard on irrigation because there's a lot of variables with irrigation. But, potentially, if you have done it, we might be able to reconstruct and be able to get an incentive anymore. That change occurred January 15, I believe it was. So, yes.
I've got a 75 horsepower motor on a pump, and I've had several pump people tell me that I didn't need near that big a pump, a motor for that pump. Would that be something that?
Motor size usually, of course, now do you have a horsepower charge based on nameplate? You do not. So it's probably not an issue. Having a larger sized motor on a pump is not a problem typically. Yes?
I just had a quick question about like sprinkler package incentives, how often do they qualify for that?
Oh, 5 years.
Every 5 years, good.
Yes.
Where do we sign up for the incentive here, you know, through the well office?
Right through Jeff.
Yep. Because we do need help, we got 3 pivots going, John, they're about as efficient as 3-legged cats. You know.
Yeah,
Tom, I got your down.
On reimbursement, how exactly do you expect a person to, it can be done to, on the cut and pipe press repair,
That's
how
always,
would you expect for it to be documented by the owner, the irrigator?
oh, if you're doing it yourself?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Just give Jeff, write it out, just let him know.
Write it on a calendar?
Yeah.
And take a picture. If a lot of phones nowadays have a camera, you know, if you can take a snapshot of, you know, it leaking or what you repaired, that's documentation.
I'll get my neighbor to come over.
We're talking to Jim.
Got a witness.
I'll go verify his leak.
There you go.
So before you leave today, if you plan on looking at your pump or doing any sprinkler pack, get with me and let me get a list of everybody who's got projects or has done projects. Well, we can make sure to follow back up with you and get everything submitted and try to schedule it and see what we're looking at for the year. So.
All right. Well, at this point then, we'll move into our LIPA demonstration project. I know a lot of you have come to hear about that, how things went last year. I'm going to ask her to also help participate in this, as well as Howard. So we're going to switch and into that presentation.
Not anymore, I just need to get him all the information. I can't tell you what it is. But we can
So,
submit it just like we just did.
I'd like to, first off, shout out a big appreciation to Kirk and Thomas, as well as to Howard. Troy Peters, he kind of leads the project from Washington State University. Myself, Corinne Mock, who was out, and Kirk got to meet her. She handles a lot of the contract parts of the project. Josh Martin, who came down and helped do the installation from our office, and then Jeanette, who helped tremendously as well down here. And then finally, to the FFA class here at Wells, who did a lot of the work this last summer. So the project was to look at the opportunity to drop the water down from the pivot down to near or on the ground. And we've got some photos here. That system over there in the upper right is one in Gooding, Idaho, watering alfalfa. And they're just dropping the drop tube down onto the ground and letting it drag. System down here on the lower right is system in Texas. And you'll notice that they're watering every other row. The systems generally use 6 to 10 PSI regulators. So we're going to drop from typically a 20 PSI regulator down to 6 to 10. More commonly 6. Another photo of the system in Gooding. And another picture. And you'll see here the 6 PSI regulators on this system.
That particular system is distributing lagoon water.
Yeah, and that was
a big deal for
That was a
Robin.
big deal to handle odor issues. So that's from dairy operation, I'm assuming. And here again, I think this is probably cotton. That's what generally I think they irrigate. This is down in Texas in the Dust Bowl area. These systems down there are generally set up to supplement rainfall. They get more rain even in the Dust Bowl area than we do. They typically will get, say, 15 inches of rainfall, and most of that occurs in the summertime. So their pivots are designed for like 350 gallons per minute.
And that's another challenge as well, because that's just supplemental water, you don't have to be quite as on top of being able to put on a lot of water at one time like we do here. We have to meet full crop water use. And if they can just kind of keep supplementing along, they have a lot lower problem with infiltration issues or other issues as well. So we've got a more challenging system.
I was looking at the data, and even during the Dust Bowl era of the 30s, they were still getting, 7, 8 inches of rainfall in the summer. We don't get that. So, with LIPA though, we're putting a lot of water down at one location, and so you can end up with some real management problems. Erosion and runoff. So how can we try to deal with that? Do you want to talk about the different management techniques, Howard?
Well, ideally for this particular system, you're putting a lot of water on a small area. So the first thing that comes to mind is you want a high intake soil, like we have a lot of around here. At Dolls, that soil worked beautifully. You could put the water down, it went into the ground, no problem. What we would like to also look at, and we'll talk more about a little later, is can we, with some other management practices, extend the range? Can we run on fields a little more than 1% slope? I think if we're careful, we can run with surface water. Dick and I both are thinking we don't really have to circle plant. That's more of a row crop constraint. And what we've seen so far, I think we're just good with running the pivot and planting small grains, alfalfa pasture under it with no problem whatsoever. We may consider furrow diking in some areas, or the equivalent that you might do on some pasture or alfalfa situations. The big thing that we have to fight is getting enough water into the soil without any runoff. and we'll be looking at additional possibilities for doing that. Crop residue is one, leaving roads uncompacted. And then at some point, we'll probably talk a little bit more about soil moisture monitoring and how was a good practice for this, and how in general it's a pretty good practice when you're short on water.
This photo shows the different types of applications using LIPA. The 4 photos here are photos of the quad sprinkler head by Seninger. There's a couple different bubbler type modes, and then we have a spray mode and a chemigation mode where we're trying to get the water up underneath the leaves. For example, with potato beetle, you could that would be a good technique to apply during that time. This is the photo of the system in Gooding where they're just running the hose down on the ground. And that is typically what is done in Texas, where you're just running a sock in the road.
One of the things that we're looking at here is, depending on what we want to do with the system, we can significantly cut the cost. The LIPA heads themselves are $30-some a piece.
That was these quad.
The quad heads. And so if you want to do the dribbling like you see there for maximum efficiency, that means you need something like the quad head, because you have to have water in our climate, you have to have water to germinate things too. In Texas, they don't have to worry about that. And so here we have to be able to germinate as well, which meant we needed both the spray and the dribbler. But with the dribbler, it also implies you're going to have to narrow that spacing between drops down to maybe 2.5 feet. And so the thrust of our work here is partly, can we achieve almost as good a benefit with just that lower left-hand spray position? If we can do that, we can go with a much cheaper spray. We can leave the units widened out to about 5 feet. And Dick's going to talk about how that worked.
Along with Kurt.
And your crops that you're doing here are alfalfa?
And oats.
I would say that we're doing some demos up in the Magic Valley now, and we're also looking at those. I'm looking at them on small grain for some disease considerations as well. And a number of crops up there.
What about pasture?
Yes.
The line that you guys drag on the ground, what kind of a spread do you get as far as the moisture? How far your lines
That's
apart?
going to depend on your soil.
Oh.
Depends on soil and flow rate, and quite frankly, I'm not a real big fan of going clear to the point where you just turn it loose on the ground.
Right.
You have just a very few soils where that will really work.
Right.
Getting the pivot stuck a lot less?
Yep.
Oh, so LIPA benefits again. In the extreme, if you go all the way with, while you're not watering the entire surface area, you get, so you have less evaporative losses, and less wind drift, reducing evaporation, and operating at lower pressure. Those are the big advantages. So the demonstration project was to convert over a span of a center pivot to LIPA, leaving the rest of the pivot in with the original system, and we call that MESA, or mid-elevation sprinkler application. That way we could do a comparison between the two. And this bottom little graph here kind of shows you how we were going to set it up. So we just have one section converted. So here we are out at the Dahl Ranch on this pivot. Took these pictures basically last winter of the pivot. It as you can see here, we have Nelson rotators on this pivot. So we needed to do a conversion to install our section of LIPA equipment. So we went out to the shop we're going to be at in a little bit here and put some equipment together to add more drops. Getting it all put together and voila. So we go from one outlet and now which had from the gooseneck, and now we'll have 2 drops.
This was, on one span. We're certainly not advocating this for a full pivot. It was a little bit labor intensive, and that PVC is not going to last forever under these high UV conditions. And so that was strictly to evaluate the concept on a short-term basis. That was an easy way to do it.
Yeah. So here is Howard and Troy getting up on the pivot to do the installation.
It was cold that day.
Yeah. Well, we did it during the winter. And we did set up a few with a 3-foot spacing besides 5-foot spacing. So the original spacing was 10. And so we put in twice as many drops on, and then here we've got 3 times as many drops, just to do an evaluation on it.
See, if you were going to do the true dribbling part of it, that 3-foot spacing would have been probably where you ended up. And we looked at it and eventually decided that wasn't really necessary.
So then we got the local FFA students to assist during the summer to do the data collection. And Howard gave them a 1-hour presentation about water management. And then we headed to the field. We had 7 girls and 5 boys went out, and they did a lot of work because they helped install all the equipment so that we could capture the results during the summer of how these different systems would respond. So we're putting in soil moisture sensors and tubes so that we can run a soil moisture sensor down the tube to measure at different depths. So the kids are getting those tubes prepared so we can get them in the ground. They're 5 feet in length, and so that was a job, getting those in. Here they are getting them started, getting them augered down.
Now, installing those tubes, you can see that they do that by running a bucket auger down the inside, augering it out, and then taking a rubber hammer and pounding the tube down in that. And that's not a trivial job.
What type sensors were you using?
Dick can speak to that. It was his unit.
With the tube, it's a Troxler frequency domain response type meter, and it's the same type meter. John Deere now has an irrigation scheduling program. It's the same type of sensor that John Deere uses in their program. It's EnviroScan is another unit that uses that same technology. It's measuring the soil capacitance, I believe.
Yeah. And so this is one unit that you carry around and you drop down each tube individually, and then you come back at some time interval and drop it down again
So it's
and
not
measure.
a-
So it's
it's
not
not a
something left in
permanent
place.
Yeah.
So it's a way of getting measuring a lot of different places with just one unit. But you come back periodically.
Yeah, it's all manual. It's like a neutron probe, if you're familiar with the neutron probe. It's to basically do the same thing and looks the same, works the same as a neutron probe, but without the nuclear source. Yeah.
Now, so Dick doesn't glow in the dark and I do. I've got the neutron probe.
Did you put those throughout the pivot or just in your test area?
In the test area.
Okay, so you didn't compare to how the
Yes, we
over
did.
section, you did?
Yeah.
So
we
there
did.
were, it was throughout the pivot then?
Well, yeah, in a little bit, you'll see how we've got those set up. We also put in a logging system, and it measured every hour, and we had sensors in. So this was installed on a more permanent type basis, the actual sensors.
And we dug a hole and put these sensors in the side of the hole at 4 different depths. And my arm was only so long, and so the bottom one stopped at 30 inches. But that was a way of actually being able to record every time the pivot came across. You could see when the moisture hit each one of those depths and give us a little bit better idea for each of the treatments what was going on in just one spot. And
Right.
so,
Yeah, and instead, we had it every hour versus once a week. So with the tubes, like, we were able to see seasonal trends of what was happening. But with the logger, I mean, you're seeing real time, what is actually happening in the soil. Oops, I went backwards, sorry. So, this is a picture of the logger up on the fence post.
there's a little antenna on top of there that particular logger takes the results from the sensors that are buried in the soil. And we also have a rain gauge that hooks to it too on one of them, so that we could identify how much water was applied with the pivot every time it passed over. And that information can be either downloaded at the site, or if with a transmitter, we were sitting out in the pickup out at the edge of the field or a little beyond, and downloading to a laptop.
And I guess we didn't bring any sensors, but they kind of look, they're like a fork.
Two prongs about that long, separated by a short distance. And again, they're looking at a capacitance kind of.
Right, those are time domain reflectometry sensors.
Rather than the frequency.
Right.
Yeah. But again, they're looking at what's happening between two different little pieces of soil.
So they transmit the data it's collecting from the sensor. You don't run wires to a box.
What we
It
have
will
right there.
transmit to a receiver of some kind.
The receiver is actually right there in that
Right.
little white box. The sensors were buried about 2 feet away from that steel post and trenched underground and then run up the post.
Okay, so
and
there was wires from them.
wires from the sensors to that white box.
And you put those in conduit, I would assume.
We put them.
We should have.
Well, we taped them pretty well, and we only had one problem.
Squirrels
Next
or
year it will
gophers.
all be
That's
in
right.
conduit.
Yeah.
You've got more vigorous chewing critters down here than we do.
They're hungry.
They're already out.
Yeah.
No.
There's a close-up picture of the logger. These loggers are 5-channel. We had 4 sensors, so you can have 4 different depths, and then we had a precipitation gauge connected as well.
What's your depth you're setting or you want your moisture to go down, how, into the soil? Cause like most pivots, most down Pine Valley, if you can get surface wet, you're doing good, but, we don't get, and we have a hard pan at, about 40 inches, and
Okay.
it's impenetrable. You know what I mean, backhoe can't hardly dig it.
Right, so that's gonna be your root depth then.
Uh-huh.
That'll be it.
It is, yeah.
Here, we got a very deep soil profile. Alfalfa roots can go down, say, 5 feet. You're gonna have roots going down to that depth. We measured with in the tubes, we were measuring down to 48 inches, so 4 feet. And then grain, it's about 2.5 feet, I believe.
I usually figure 3 feet if
3
you've got,
feet.
if you've got the soil, 2.5 to 3 feet.
Okay.
We measured a fair bit of root extraction down at 30 inches.
The roots will go down to that depth if you're getting water down.
Exactly, and that's the real challenge with the pivot, is getting the water down there.
Right, soaking it down on it.
Yeah.
If you look closely, you might be able to see the wires here. They're installing the sensors. And the final tie-up to the logger. And then transmission to the computer. And fortunately, everything worked. So now, oh yeah, meanwhile, that's right. It was quite a job getting those tubes in, because we had the different spacings for the LIPA and then the regular Nelson rotators that we wanted to put those in. And so it took all day to get those tubes in. And here we have them set 1 foot apart, and so we have 5 feet. That was one span for the LIPA system, or one spacing between sprinklers. Now here are the kids getting the readings using the Troxler. Drops the sensor down the tube, and then take a reading at various depths. We have a stop on the cable so that they know exactly what depth to get the reading at. And here is the LIPA installation operating. This is the 5 foot spacing here, and we are 1 foot above the ground. And that, what you see is with the Seninger quad spray heads in the spray pattern. And that was kept all season long, just in the spray pattern, which we felt, I think, was probably as good as anything.
Well, the nice thing about that is that you have full coverage for germination. If you have to switch back and forth between dribbling, which is not going to give you for full coverage for germination, and that, it's just more labor. And as Dick says, you can get within 1 or 2 percentage points of the same efficiency here as you can by going the extra nuisance to dribbling, and a whole lot lower cost.
Is there any more efficiency on the plant as far as your photosynthesis? If you're dribbling and putting the water into the soil and not on the plant? Because, you know, we know it's like that ran well of ours up there, that water's ice cold coming out of it. And it's, what is it now, they're probably 4 foot high, they're spraying all the time. But that cold water hitting that alfalfa, and it's 110 degrees in the cold water, you know, if it was put right onto the soil, would the plant grow better? If you guys ever run any tests, then, you know, actually, I think it kind of stuns it when it, like last year, we had 110 degrees a lot of days. You know, and you'd scald the pig out there if he was laying there and that cold water come over the top.
You talked about that on our way down.
Yes. There are some advantages. One of the things that I can think of, we don't do a lot of measurements on that. We intuitively think, yes, if you have a grass that likes nice warm conditions to grow and you're cooling it off with cold water, you're slowing the plant growth processes and photosynthesis a little bit. One of the best illustrations is on corn in the Magic Valley. We're doing some research on station with surface irrigated corn and sprinkler irrigated corn. And the folks that had been farming around there for a long time, well, I found that, the sprinkler irrigated corn was running about a week later. And talking to some of the folks that had been irrigating there for years, they said, yep, that's about right. We usually figure that because of the cooling from even, 50-degree water up there coming onto the corn, which really likes heat, we were slowing the growth down by about a week over the course of the season. So that, it does make a difference. How big a difference? There's not a lot of hard data, but it does make a difference.
Well, and just the evaporative cooling as well. You are lowering your temperature.
And I've often wondered if it's kind of like magnifying glass, when the beads of water are on the save avos, when the sun hitting it, it would magnify either one way or the other, the dewdrops or your raindrops would, on the photosensitive.
That's, we were actually talking about that very issue on the way down here. That when you're applying water to the top of the canopy in midsummer, you're actually scalding those leaves just a little bit because of exactly what you said, that prism effect through the raindrops. And then when you, in a grain crop, if you get the watering into the heads beyond soft dough when it's starting to mature, we routinely see some reduction in protein content. The heads may not have quite, may shrivel a little bit more. The test weight isn't quite as high. Even because you've watered past what we think is optimum, you get water in those heads and bad things happen late in the season. And part of that, some of the farmers say, well, we've got water in there, we get sun shining on it, and you're just almost cooking some of those kernels as they're developing. And whether that's the case or not, we see the damage.
What about alkaline soils? And this is great, but if you need to flush saline, soils, how does that affect it?
What that would do is, again, you're going to be limited on your application rate by the gallonage on the pivot. When flush, and you're certainly not going to flush in mid-season, you can hardly keep up. When you can flush, probably the best time would be after harvest or in late summer, early fall, when you don't have quite as high a plant water demand and you actually can come back around with the pivot more often than the plant needs it and actually build up moisture in the soil and flush it. You can do that late in the fall just by running some extra circles after the crop doesn't need the water anymore. And that is something that's going to come back and bite us if we're not careful on a lot of fields, is by so carefully applying just the water we need, we're building up salt levels. And so we have to have that capacity at one point or another. Late fall is the time to do it. After the demand charges drop off, right?
But you can do it. You can do it without re-nozzling or.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and of course with this system, you're putting on a higher application rate.
You're certainly getting more of it into the ground.
Yeah. This photo shows you the difference in your pattern between the LIPA and the Nelson rotators. Quite a difference. Part of that is due to wind drift too, which there was no wind drift under the LIPA.
Well, let's start laying your hay down though, like on alfalfa, because we have.
That's a question for Kurt.
Well, Kurt got that knowledge.
No.
No? Okay.
Again, in concept, see, these are a foot off the ground, and so one of the main ways you pick up some additional water saving is that once the alfalfa is up over the top of those nozzles, you're shooting water out in amongst the stems. You're not putting water clear on the very top. You're not getting wet alfalfa leaves and the weight up there, so it ought to lodge less.
Do you still get the coverage though when the alfalfa?
Good point, and Dick will speak to that with some of the data coming up. That was our question too.
Okay, so here are the results. This is first week of watering, and this is under the LIPA. We're building the moisture up in the root zone here. We've got depths, there are 4 lines 4 depths, 12, 18, 24, and 30 inches. Down at the bottom is the precipitation. So you can see, we get a spike, and then you can see the water
Right.
jump.
The best way to see the buildup is, these are the top 3 sensors. The 30-inch sensor is the pink one. So we're starting off down here at this moisture content. We irrigate, it pops up to here. We irrigate again, it pops up a little bit more. And so you can see we've built from here up to here in those first 3 irrigations. We're moving water down to 30 inches. The other ones are just kind of holding their own. They're pretty full and they're passing water on down.
And so this, again, this is the first week. Now let's go to the second week. We have built our soil moisture up, and it has flatlined now. We're not adding additional moisture to that first 30 inches. Everything is going on down below that at this point under the LIPA system.
What soil type are you dealing with this study?
What would you call it? Kurt, what do they call it? It's got sand in it, it's got gravel in it, it's got a kind of a silt loam on the very top in places.
We've always called it sandy.
Yeah, it's got lots of sand.
Sandy loam or just sand?
I would say a sandy loam.
Yeah.
With more gravel in it at certain depths.
Right.
Not a real high water holding capacity, and so as you put water on, it doesn't hold too much and it goes down.
Yeah.
Did it flood out your ground squirrel?
We hoped it would, but it didn't.
Okay, now, this is the LIPA. I want you to pay particular attention here of the way this graph looks under LIPA. We're still flatlined. It looks just like the previous photo. And right after first crop cutting, again, we're holding our moisture. It's going up a little bit here. We didn't add all that much because the water was still there after first cutting.
We're keeping up pretty well.
We're keeping up.
So you're able to get your AS quicker and the water's still there, you're growing your next.
I don't know that we're getting it off any quicker, but we've got adequate moisture there for the green up following harvest.
How old was the crop?
About 4 years.
What time of year is that? Around end of June, first part of July with that first crop?
I can back up and I can give you the dates when that. Oh, that was immediately following. Let's see.
Got it?
Is that? Nope, that's back the other way. Okay. So this is July 5th, and this is right after first crop cutting. So it would have been the end of June, 1st of July. Okay, now we're going to look at the rotators. And what we see is a very similar pattern to LIPA. This is at the beginning. This is our first week of watering. And we're building the moisture up. Very similar to what we did under LIPA. The second week, we flatlined, just like we did under LIPA. There's really no difference, was our finding here. But now, I want you to pay particular attention when we had full canopy. And look at this one now. We had full canopy and we are not getting much of a response like we did with LIPA.
You have a lot less wetting immediately after the pivot passes. If you looked at the volume of water under those spikes, it's a lot less here. The
Yeah, we
water's
could-
not making it to the canopy.
We could go back.
So evaporation's stealing it?
Yep.
You know, it's laying on the canopy and then evaporation's taking it.
That's,
Yeah, this
yeah,
is,
see,
no, see the difference? We got all these huge spikes here, and those are gone. Because all the water is landing on the canopy, evaporating and not getting to the ground.
with the normal system.
Our squirrels drink most of it. Stop right off this. Yeah.
Find a market for swells.
After you cut though, we get the response back. We've got the open ground and that water can get to the ground now, under the rotators.
Well, what percent was the pivot set on? Has it ever changed, or is it?
It did change, obviously, because you slowed it down after cutting.
In the LIPA system, are you dragging those nozzles through the alfalfa?
Through the alfalfa.
So is this done on anything but alfalfa? Was it done on any grain to where the canopy wasn't as much as alfalfa is?
You had oats.
Half of the pivot was in oats.
So are
They
some
weren't-
some
you
of
didn't have
these
sensors in the oats.
We didn't have any of the sensors in the oats.
But this year we will have other information from other crops as well to go with it.
Have you ever done a cut through, like digging a main line trench? You know, in Diamond Valley, they used to flood irrigate all that years ago. Then they went to wheel lines, and then they went to water guide pivots, and a friend of mine done a lot of excavating down there on these pivots, putting in the main line. And when they used to flood irrigate, they had some alfalfa roots, you'd go 8 feet deep and they were still going.
That's essentially what we're doing here, is we're going back to flood irrigation, but in a controlled manner, with using the pivot as our delivery system.
And soaking it down in.
And soaking it down in.
Cause like I said, when they had them wheel lines and squirting out, the roots would go down about 18 inches, 2 feet, and turn around and come back toward the surface. They would horseshoe back up and come back up looking for water. You know, is what they were doing.
Yeah, that's one of our biggest challenges with center pivots is in a situation where you are a little bit limited in how fast you can get water into the ground. You know, by mid-season, you may only have about 18 inches worth of soil that gets wet up and dried down with the crop growth, and you know, your effective root zone is about 18 inches with an alfalfa plant that could go much deeper. So one of the things a lot of us are trying to come up with is any way that we can get more water into the soil and exploit that deeper rooting possibility for alfalfa. Gives you more of a root, gives you more reservoir. If you could wet down to 4 feet, that gives you, you know, 3, 4, 5 inches of additional water you can carry into the mid part of the season when you're already out of water otherwise. And so that's what a lot of us are trying to come up with, something that would get more water in so that the pivots didn't have such a shallow root zone.
So, conclusions. What we found is that there was very little difference between LIPA and MESA early in the season before full crop canopy and at night. The only difference will be what difference there is in evaporative losses between, say, maybe a 6-foot drop versus a 1-foot drop. So say a 5-foot difference, how much evaporation do you have in that? It's not a whole lot. And so there's not much difference. But then, when you get to a full canopy and that water lands on the canopy, now that's when we see the big difference. And we felt as though it was nearly 30% loss or or difference between Mesa and Lipa. And so that's midsummer, full canopy during the daytime. At nighttime, again, that evaporative loss really drops off, and so there's not a whole lot of difference. But we're getting then that much more water on during the day, midsummer, when you really need it. As far as the spacing, what we found is that the 3-foot spacing was much better than the 5-foot spacing as far as uniformity for Lipa. However, with alfalfa and grain, where it's a fibrous root, it's probably not going to matter because that root zone spreads out and it's going to pick up the water. So uniformity probably doesn't necessarily, or the spacing doesn't necessarily have that much of an effect on yield. Is what we're guessing, but we may have to study that a little bit more.
Is there a similar advantage in spreading it horizontally as there is to developing that root zone depth? Do you get better absorption from your plants if you have more area for it to spread out?
Generally, what we're seeing is you can put it's soil dependent, basically, to get it into the ground. What you catch on the plants as you're watering is maybe a small amount, 5/100 of an inch, 1/10 of an inch or something. It's a fairly small amount that you catch on the plants themselves. What gets to the ground, if you have a tight, low intake soil, our mantra has been spread out the pattern as much as possible to put that water on as large an area as you can so it has a chance to soak in without running off. This particular technology is really best adapted to the soils like we have here, where you can put water on a smaller area and the soil surface is permeable enough for the water to go right in. And so whether you put it in 3 feet apart or 5 feet apart isn't really that critical to crop growth. You're going to get maybe a little more under the drop itself, a little less out in here, but water tends to redistribute a little bit underground anyway. And then, as Dick was saying, the roots go a lot of places. I mean, 5 feet apart, the farthest you are is 2.5 feet away from any application device, and most crops can handle that. In western Kansas, where they're using buried drip on corn production, again, it's a supplemental source, but what they're finding is they're putting the lines in 5 feet apart. Now, we couldn't begin to do that in Idaho or Nevada because we have to put on all the water rather than supplemental. But they're finding that with the water they have and supplemental water, the plant roots can get that additional water they need, from that far away.
Can you get a 3-foot applicator for fertilizer so you aren't wasting the other 2 foot?
Well, I don't know about that, but that did raise a question when I was looking at the Texas pictures. We learned something a couple of years ago, relearned. If you're broadcasting fertilizer and you're watering every other row, you can leave some fertilizer high and dry.
And it's expensive.
It's expensive, and then you've got water quality problems as well. And our crop was nitrogen stressed when it shouldn't have been.
Excuse me, what damage to the cattle does grading? Because everybody grades their pivots in the fall or whatever. If you're a foot off the ground, Kirk, what'd you do? Put electric fence around the pivot or fenced it or?
They're pretty tough, didn't bother them.
They didn't-
We've had cattle there all winter and it hasn't bothered them at all.
Yeah.
Didn't bother those drops right onto the ground.
These are a foot above the ground, aren't they?
Yep.
Yeah, yours aren't on the ground, they're a foot
Yeah,
above.
they have chewed more of them from the higher drops than we
And
just
at the
haven't,
bottom.
they haven't affected the Lipa drops.
That's what I was wondering, because just, the cattle on our place, I know they would tear up anything that was kind of up about head level by scratching on it, chewing on it, whatever. But since the business part of the sprinkler is down just off the ground, they gotta bend over to do something there, and if they kick it or walk past it, it's on flexible hose, and so it just deflects, and they're pretty durable. So I was wondering about the damage, and I'm glad to have you verify that.
So did you notice much yield difference under the LIPA versus the standard rotator, and was there a difference in quality?
We're guessing probably not much difference.
Not much difference.
Yeah, and you wanna explain why, Howard?
The reason that we didn't see any difference this year was that both were adequately watered. If you had limited water and the difference in application efficiency between the LIPA and the standard, when that would come into play is if you have less than optimum water. Then you'd see the LIPA being well watered, and then you'd see the standard being a bit drought stressed. Then you would see more differences. What we saw this year was that we had plenty of water on both. We moved water deeper on the LIPA than we did on the standard part of the system, but it was still within the root zone, so we didn't lose it.
Yeah, there was still plenty of water for both.
Yeah.
So we didn't see any yield difference.
You think
But-
that'll change this year because the water stayed down in the roots longer? So when it comes this spring, do you think you might notice a difference?
Oh, because of the deeper,
Mhm.
that
That's a
might,
possibility.
yeah,
Because
that's
it
a
was nourished
possibility.
longer with that moisture?
Right, that it might have a better start in the spring.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, we see in some of our lighter soils like this, if you've got good water as it's coming out of dormancy, you get higher yield on first cutting, and your water use efficiency is greatest on first cutting. You know, the water that it takes to grow a ton of hay, there's less water required on first cutting, particularly if you have it well watered to start with. And if you've got the water down there to start with, you're in good shape, rather than having a dry profile. Excellent point.
Okay, so what's the plans for this year? Howard has built a test stand. And this is going to simulate the operation of a LIPA system on a pivot.
This is a moving sprinkler infiltrometer, and I've never heard of such a thing before, but it's what we need for center pivots because we're towing this across the field at the same speed that the outer tower would go on a center pivot. What we're trying to do is be as realistic as we can be with conditions under the machine, and then screen a large number of situations and say, where should we use this and where should we stay away from? My purchasing agent was raised her eyebrows a little bit when I started purchasing
Bicycle tires?
wall tent frames. She says, what are you doing? And then about the time I walked in with a bicycle tire Ford purchase, she says, what are you doing? But this is what both Troy and I are going to use this summer and next summer to really do much larger scale screening of where we ought to use this technology and where we shouldn't. And this is what we're also going to use to say, what can we do to kind of stretch the limits a little bit if we really want to?
And you have the ability to change the spacing here, which is kind of nice. Use different types of heads. So different testing methods can be employed with this and not have to go to the expense of putting it right on your pivot to see if it's going to work. So that is basically the presentation. We understand there are a lot of folks interested in cost.
Cost. The best we could come up with was the cost for the spray head, the cost for the hose, the fittings to go from the pivot itself, from the gooseneck, doubling, well, if we went with a Y fitting on the gooseneck to turn one drop into two and cut the spacing to about 5 feet. The price per drop is somewhere around $30 for all the parts and equipment, and then there would be the cost of labor on top of that. But the hardware itself is approximately $30 per drop to get it done. And so if you've got maybe 260 drops on a pivot, that's looking at about somewhere in the $8,000 range to just start at the pivot pipe itself and go new from there on down with this kind of a system.
And then with the BPA rebate would cover approximately, say, $10 or so per drop. So
So that'd be about a third of it,
uh-huh,
so.
that should cover the labor.
And, you know, thinking back to what we saw on our uniformity testing, it makes sense in a lot of cases if your pivot package is older than about 7 or 8 years, you probably ought to be looking carefully at replacing it anyway for other reasons. The regulators are sticking in the wrong place and you're getting high, low, and in between. While you're replacing, would be a good time to consider this anyway.
Any other questions?
Well, pretty much you gotta have a pretty level field though.
That's what we're working on. You know, at the start here, we're saying, just so we don't have a train wreck, we want this to work for people. We know that it works on relatively level fields, high intake soils. We know that works. Now our question is, how much can we push the envelope? How steep can we go on certain soils? You know, what do you have to do?
The other thing that could be considered though, there, just about you feel everybody could employ it to a certain extent. You don't necessarily have to go all the way out on your pivot with this technology. You could have the inner, say, half of your pivot where you have the low flow rates and put the LIPA in there, and at least you get the advantage of the higher application rate. Or I shouldn't say that, higher efficiency, higher application efficiency. And maybe if you've just got a half pivot, you've got lower flow rates to start with, or say a 40-acre pivot, small pivots, you could put it on those because again, you've got low application rates already. And you might be able to just go ahead and switch it right over to LIPA. It's on, when you get to your quarter-mile pivots, full circle, that's where we run into issues because we've got such high flow rates out on the end of those pivots.
What happens if you do every other nozzle? Every other one? Do the LIPA and bring it down to the 1 foot above the ground, and then you leave your other one, the next one over, up where it's always been. Have you tried anything like that?
No, hadn't thought about that.
Haven't tried that at all. It would be somewhere intermediate because you'd be spreading the water pattern out with your high ones and having a lower instantaneous application with that, and so it would be somewhere in between. You know, I think
I'm thinking if it would hold that water from one season to the next, you're keeping more water down further in your roots from one season to the next.
Yeah, it would be a nice hybrid. I think what we're looking at is that if this looks like a viable technology, and it does, all right, now where should we put it, and how can we do some of these special things like we're talking about to move it on to conditions where it might not originally apply?
Look at different soil types and
Exactly.
Well, also, I've heard a lot of stories on people thinking pivots are causing all these thunderstorms from the evaporation rates. This might cut down on that. I mean, when you have entire states that are under pivot, with that evaporation rate with 100 degrees weather, they think they're causing more rainstorms.
we could use some more pivots.
Well, yeah, it undoubtedly causes more because you do have a lot of water being evaporated. But we generally don't see the thunderstorms. It's probably the water that evaporates here ends up in the Midwest.
Well, you know, they set up a series of weather stations in the Magic Valley, starting at the desert, out by west of Beulah, and moving on into the irrigated area a number of years ago. They found that the water use requirement, the evapotranspiration out at the edge of the desert, where wind coming off the desert was a little hotter and drier, was about 0.05 of an inch per day greater than it was as you moved into the area. Relative humidity was higher, air temperature was lower, within a mile of moving into the irrigated area, and it stayed about the same for the rest of the way. So it does change that microclimate. And also, if you have desert on the upstream side, that is a situation where maybe your agromet or other estimated ETs might need to be bumped up a little bit, because you do have a higher evaporative demand in that situation, as you well know.
We're starting to see more of that down, you know, our range is over towards Crescent Valley where Cortez Mine is and the pipeline can. There's a lot of dewatering down there, probably 20,000 gallons a minute they're dewatering. And they're putting them in, a lot of it they're resaturant, they have 4 reservoirs. And they're resaturant back into the ground. And then, like up there, a lot of them alkali flats, there's water on them now most of the year. And we're seeing what we've been calling lake effect, is because it's evaporating down there, the hot wind that comes through Crescent Valley, and it's getting back up into our country, and it's good. We've had cloudburst and rain, and it's really put a lot more moisture on that side over there. And because I was on that Humboldt River Authority, and we checked, because I kept telling them, how much are these open pit mines full of water, you know, after they're done mining, how much are they evaporating? Well, Lone Tree Mine down there is 1,250 gallons a minute is evaporating, and that's year-round until it's winter or summer, until it's ice covered. If it freezes up, then it eliminates it. But there's 1,250 gallons out of that little Lone Tree pit that's evaporating out of there. Now you get these pivots scattered over up on top, and you get like Diamond Valley. I don't know how many pivots they got down there, but there's a lot of evaporation, and you know, it all dumps on Utah though. It never dumps over here. It keeps going.
You know, we have had a few pictures. It never failed that when we were down here, the wind wasn't blowing quite as hard as it might otherwise, but yeah, there are some pictures
Could you
that.
consider it moving?
Well, I don't think I could make it a little slower if I did. But we had some pictures, and some of the times we were down, there was a really large visual difference between the water that was moving on across the field under the standard part of the pivot versus no water or mist movement at all when we had it drop down. I mean, you could get your face wet a few hundred feet downstream from the main part of the pivot. And so we know that evaporation just from here down to here is a factor.
Why around Twin Falls, and I've been noticing, my son-in-law lives up there and my daughter, and they're putting sprinklers back up on top of the pivot. You know, that's caveman stuff, you know, we've got, you know, but hell, it's in corn, it was on beets and everything else, but they're putting them back up on top. And you can see that just vapor just leaving the evaporation.
That was partly driven by the folks that raise a lot of silage corn, where they've got 12, 14 foot tall corn silage, and they were pulling off drops as the corn went through there with drops on it. And so that was one attempt that some people are using to get the water up above the silage corn so they don't rip off the drops. The thinking being that when it's in corn, you leave it up there. When it's not, you switch it over to the regular drop with a quick disconnect would be the ideal, but that generally doesn't happen.
A lot of the reason why they're going to those up tops too is it seems like some of those guys are planting a higher population than what, because I grew up around silage corn and we weren't planting that high of a population, so their corn's getting taller and it spreads the water out. Some argue that they get a better coverage with it, and others are arguing that it helps wash off the spider mite too when they're doing it. Because then your drops don't hang down right in that canopy. And you don't notice it so much where your spacings are at 9.5 feet towards the end of the machine, but where you get to the front of the machine where we space them out at 19 feet, that's where they're seeing the water coverage when they have drops, because it can't break through that canopy, so they don't get the coverage. That's why a lot of those guys are switching back to the up tops.
Anything else you want to add, Kirk?
Yeah.
I can say this, a lot more people saw that field than I did last year. And You can ask these two guys anything, a simple question and get a pageant. They are walking textbooks, and I appreciate their doing this. It's been fun. And the thing that we noticed is what Howard just addressed. On windy afternoons, the water was landing on the ground under these LIPA. And you all know, on windy afternoons, the water is gone. It's been very interesting and worthwhile.
Kirk, did the wind ever quit in Ruby Valley? What about the
One-
windy
one
night
time
and
it
windy
did.
morning?
It changes direction.
Changes direction.
Yes.
Do you see a significant water savings by putting these LIPA heads on compared to the regular heads? Say you have water, I mean a normal pivot takes 800-900 gallons a minute, say you only have 6, 7.
Right.
If you was to switch it over, would you still be able to get your coverage?
So what we're thinking is that the published data says about 10 to 15% savings with LEAP. What we observed is that really occurs in midsummer on the hot days and no canopy. If you got canopy, then anytime you're gonna basically during the daytime when you have the higher evaporative losses, you're gonna see the savings. So, but in general, what the published data says that over the season, it's about 10 to 15%. The application efficiency for LIPA is around the method we were using is about a 95% application efficiency, which is pretty high.
For a typical center pivot, the textbook value and the practical value is about 85%. So there you're seeing at a kind of a 10 percentage point gain right there. And I don't know, after being down and working around that particular pivot last summer, I'm still in my mind questioning if we're not a little higher difference in efficiencies than we're seeing, because there was a large observable difference if you were standing.
Well, that's where we feel as though probably close to 30% difference, during the summer.
During the summer, yeah.
During the summer. But when you average it out, early season, late season, when your evaporative losses aren't as high, it kind of averages out to maybe at the lower level then. Because we didn't see much difference early season.
So if you have your pivot nozzled for 800 gallons a minute, and you were to convert it over to the LIPA, you could convert it back to 700, maybe 720 gallons per minute.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that really works because the biggest savings are in the middle part of the season when your evaporative demand is the highest. You've got lower demand early and late, and so what you've done with this is you've lowered the peak about 30%. 20%, let's be conservative. And so you've dropped it enough so that you can down gallon and be fine for the whole season.
Yeah, because you got plenty of water early season and late season. It's that mid-season when you need the water, and that's when LIPA shines. That's what we found. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Dick. Appreciate that presentation. Kirk, you're up for about 10 more minutes. You're done. I'm done. You're done.
Thanks for being here, Kirk.
Appreciate that. We'll next have a presentation from Farmer Idaho, and Spencer's going to tell you how to save another 50% on the LIPA.
That's Scott's words. He said he's gonna offset all the costs on those LIPAs, man.
Go ahead, Spencer. Thank you.
Oh, real quick, I'm Spencer Black. I'm with Farm Board of Idaho. And I'm just gonna go through kind of a normal day. When I'm designing a pivot, I don't start at the pump. I actually start at the end of the system. And so when I look at a field, I'm gonna go through it and I'm gonna find what our critical nozzle is. And so you're gonna have, let's say you're doing a full swing pivot, 900 gallons per minute. My pressure is going to be based off the highest point in that field from where the pump is. And the reason why I'm leading to this is because once that pump is set at that pressure, that's all you're going to get out of it. And so the most crucial part of your pivot, what makes or breaks it, is your sprinkler package. And so this right here is your pressure regulator, and why I worry so much about it is because after X amount of years, they will start wearing out on you. In order for it to work, this is a 15-pound regulator right here. In order for it to work properly, I have to have 20 pounds of pressure above it. If I go below that, all of a sudden it goes into a free flow and you're not controlling any pressure. 1 or 2 of them, not a huge deal. You start getting 10 or 12 of them, that's pressure and water that we're going to be robbing from the end of the system. And so that's why this incentive, why I asked how often they do it, every 5 years you qualify for it again, so you're not paying the full cost once you've already used it. As far as sprinklers go, when if you're wanting to do a sprinkler package, a few questions that I have is I want to know the soil type and I want to know what kind of slopes we're dealing with. Wind is actually one of those things that comes third on my list, because if you get too focused on wind and you have a lot of slope and you have a really tight soil, I can put as big a droplet down as you want. If it's not going to go in the ground, that one's not going to benefit you. This one right here is an orbiter. They came out, they're the answer to this one right here. This is the Sininger IWAB. 2 different companies, patterns virtually the same. One new thing about this one that came out last year was the purple plate on it. And over there in the Hollister area, they have a really tight soil. IWAB's not a good fit for it because the water won't go in the ground. I've been putting those purple plates on it, same spread pattern, smaller water droplet size. We're getting the water in the ground, and the guys that have them on there actually really like them. Another thing I'm going to touch on, I'm going to switch from one more thing about the sprinkler incentives. I have a copy of this form in my office. It's one of those services we're providing now. If you buy a sprinkler package from us, our secretary has been filling these out for you. We'll put them in the bill when we send the bill with you, so all you have to do is put your information on it and turn it in, and you'll get that incentive. There was a few talk on variable frequency drives. A company that we use to supply us that is Mitchell Lewis. They carry a brand named Dan Foss. Can virtually do anything with the frequency drive here. Any size of pump, we can get a frequency drive for it. The reason why we use Dan Foss is because when I call Mitchell Lewis, he answers his phone. So I really like that because you can't have problems with it. As far as pivots, new products that have come out, Renke has a system called OnTrack. What that does is it gives you remote control when you're out on the road. Scott has one on his pivot, and I think it paid for itself one time already.
It did.
But the new product they have out, the one we had before was satellite, and it was fairly costly. It did give you full control of your pivot, but a new one that we have is OnTrack Cellular. Gives you basic control. We can put it on any brand of pivot as long as they don't have a computer panel with them. So if you have a Valley or Zomatic computer panel, I can't hook it up to that, but if you have their basic panels, it will work with that. Other than that, a lot of the products have stayed the same. So is there any questions that you guys have?
How much does that cost?
The OnTrack?
Yeah.
I want to say an OnTrack Cellular is going to run, I think the unit itself is about $900. And then they do a subscription plan with it for 6 months. There's a 4, 6, and 12. So for 6 months, which is the usual irrigation season, I think you're around $125 a year for that.
They have cell boost antennas or something to help you get coverage.
As long as you have Verizon wireless coverage in the area, that's how they use it.
You're in Ruby Valley.
I will tell you with mine, the coverage, cell coverage down there is terrible. And if I want to get out to anybody I walk over by the center of my pivot where that antenna is, and I can call all the time. So it moves somehow a little bit.
Well, and Scott was in a scenario where he had a computer panel on his, so it worked great to put the on-track satellite plus on there. And if we're in an area where we don't have cellular coverage, then I'm gonna go with that satellite option because it's not gonna fail you in those scenarios. Okay, that's all I've got.
So I think Spencer and Dick and Howard and everybody will be here through the next portion here. I don't want to interrupt you there, but
You're good. Keep
okay,
going.
sure. Okay, we have set up Mike here has set up with the line crew a safety demonstration for you guys with our safety trailer. The gates open right through here, and lunch is up there, so we had to bring lunch up there to make sure everybody followed us over to the safety tunnel. But lunch will be provided up in the back truck bays back here, the far right. There's plenty of parking up there, so if you need the restroom or whatever, and then we'll move on up there. Don't forget to grab a cup, and we have some coffee mugs and stuff for you there. Eni?
I just wanted to say one thing I forgot to mention. In light of our demand billing schedule and talking about getting your ground wet and saturated before the season, that's a great time to do it prior to April 25th. Get your ground wet before you start getting billed demand.
I just want to say, last year I met Spencer for the first time. I had a lot to learn. I still do have a lot to learn. But I called him, and I'm just putting in a plug for Spencer. He responded every time. He's a great guy to work with, and I strongly recommend him. The one, I wish I'd have thought of this sooner. He just reminded me of almost a nightmare we had with the on-track. We put it on there just because everything was ready for it, and wanted to try it out. And it takes so long to go back and forth that if the power ever bumped, I could look on my computer and tell me that, and I just start it up again without spending a half an hour running down the middle of the night, turn it on and back off again. But one night we'd been out bailing. My son had been out bailing, and I was laying there in bed just about asleep, and all of a sudden I thought, I don't know where he parked that doggone tractor. And so I ran to my computer, and I turned the thing off just because there was just that, once in a while you get that big feeling. And I wished I'd remember. I have it on my phone if any of you want to see it, but the tire of the pivot is just touching the front tire of the baler tractor is right where I stopped. I mean, that close, and I'm really grateful I had the on-track. So, anyhow, we're good to go then. And
How many workshops, Spencer, have you been to? How many workshops have you been to with us here?
This will be my second one.
Second one. So thanks for being here, and you'll join us up there if anybody has more questions.
Yep.
All right. So if we want to use the restroom and load up, we'll go right through that gate and straight to the southwest corner truck bays. And that's where we'll feed you and...
I know last year when you explained, like you said, make the information.
Chris and Ryan, they're here to demonstrate some of the safety features when you're out there working and have some pictures of a variety of things, and we'll let Mike kick it off, right, Mike? Sure. Everybody's getting hungry, so we'll let you get started.
Not yet.
I'll just cover a little bit on when you guys go up to the panel or something. When we go up to the panel, we'll always use the back of our hand to touch up against it. See if it's hot or not. The outside boxes come hot. And then when we work on them, we'll use like these rubber gloves on here, and the line crew uses them too. And shields on there just to make sure that we don't get shocked or anything. And we've had guys that have gone up and done everything right. The only thing they didn't have on was those rubber gloves. And he did get shocked. There was a snake in the panel on the line side, and when it phased to phase on him, he wound up in the burn center for a while. And then here's another one. You guys can see the pictures here. They went up and went to start their pump, that panel at the start of the year. And I guess it blew the meter out on there.
Yeah, he hit the start button on the pump, and that blew that meter right out of the socket. That was at the sock farm out by Jim.
what works good is to have the automatic timer, then get back in your pickup and back away about 200 feet, see if anything blows.
When you guys go to start them or something, if you're gonna do it by hand, stand to the side, so if it blows out, hopefully you're out of the way enough. Other than up here, we've got, I got some capacitors and then motor savers. This one's a time delay. So if you do you lose power, it'll time out before it comes back on. So hopefully you don't get any backspin or anything on your motor on there. But there's just different stuff up here you guys can look at, or if you got questions, go ahead and holler. And then these guys have the demonstrations on the trailer.
This is just our
I don't like 'em, I
demonstration.
can't do anything.
This is what we take to the schools and show the kids what's going on. How it works is we're feeding out of that panel here. This is a 208 volt panel. We're just back feeding this transformer, and it's coming out 7200 volts. So essentially it's the same as if you were to hook a generator up at your house without separating utilities. We can get this where we're working. Want to fire her up?
Is that what the line voltage is, distribution feeder voltage? Was it 72?
Here around the wells, we're 14.4.
Okay, but what about most of the irrigation wells out there? The taps down through the field and stuff, what
It's all,
voltage you
it's all
run?
14.4.
14.
Yeah. The only place we have 7200 is Wendover.
Okay.
And this is just a fuse cutout, 100 amp cutout with a fuse in it. You guys probably all seen these. We'll go ahead and show you how a fuse blows. Get a fault on the line.
What we're doing, we connect it to the neutral, and we go to the phase, we'll just make a phase ground fall.
Vinegar? Yep. Coming hot. That's how that operates.
No wonder you golf so good, boy, you had
We just fuse that one heavy so it won't blow. We'll go ahead and slow this guy here. We're going to simulate that light bulb to his heart. He got in trouble here. All that does is current's running through his heart. That's all it shows. Now we'll go ahead and drop a curling iron in the sink on just a regular breaker. Is that main breaker turned on? That's a GFI, it works really well.
So you better get your electrician to rewire that.
Yeah.
They played with it too much today. Oh.
Trim that. Go ahead and do the irrigation pipe, draw some arcs. Sure.
This is lunch.
One at a time, we'll be here a while.
No, they could fast.
They could fast. Microwave, but.
Supposed to be right back.
Where's that jumper? They just use that jumper.
I seen old Bill there in Carlin with a 40-foot pole in a windstorm trying to change one of them.
Yeah.
Took him a minute.
Yeah, it takes a while when the wind's blowing sometimes.
Oh, how you held it up there, you know.
So phase to phase on voltage on that, is that 38.8 then?
On this would be 12,470, 12,000 volts.
Okay,
On the
because it's,
7,200 volts, yeah.
because it's, yeah, okay,
Here it's 25,000,
okay.
14 kV to
Because
ground.
you're like, oh, Kurt. Why, cool.
Yeah, right.
That little guy keeps a smile all the time.
Yeah,
This is
he's a happy guy.
the three-phase recloser here. This is what, when you're sitting at home and your lights are blinking on and off, this is what's doing that. It's operating. All it is a breaker in oil, just for protection is what it's for.
Does it reset itself, or do you have electronic control over it?
Well, the way it's designed, it'll operate 4 times. When there's a fault on the line, it tries to clear the fault, so it'll open up and close back in really quick. Open up, close back in really quick, and then it'll slow down, open up, and close back in and hold it for a while, trying to burn whatever it may be on the line. Once it reaches 4 operations, it just locks out, and this yellow handle falls down, and now it's open. That means we got trouble somewhere. This is what we use to find the faults with.
Where is it located? All over, huh?
Yeah, we got them. I think we've got like 40 of them just out of the Wells area. So we spend a lot of time in Ruby Valley with these
Yeah.
things.
We're always getting the wrong.
Every day. Yeah.
Oh, come on, not every day.
Every other.
Start shooting those gosh damn ravens out there.
Yeah.
And quit protecting them. You wouldn't have near as much problem.
One thing we started doing is these covers on top of the cutouts. They've really helped a bunch. I think we stuck them out at your place, Jim. I don't know, maybe 3 years ago.
Could have been.
And I don't think we've been back since to replace a few birds. So
No, I was out there one time, and then I called you, because my wife and I were working on a sprinkler system, and there had to have been 5,000 blackbirds.
oh yeah.
And they all went over to a transformer bank, and I wasn't paying attention to them. All of a sudden, you couldn't hear that fuse pop because of the pop that went on with the, I assume it was the birds. And then look around and the water pressure just started going down.
Yeah, so they do help.
Yeah.
What is it you put on there to keep them off?
See that cover on top of the cutout there? That,
Oh.
that
Okay,
deal there.
that there.
Yeah. The red stuff just to insulate it from us. Try and keep them from going to the ground and causing an outage is what it's for. Other than that, that's all we have for you unless you got any questions.
What are those pickles for?
Yeah, what's the roasted pickles?
Oh yeah, we can roast it.
Burns a little longer.
Yeah, you're safer with hot dogs and pickles.
Yeah.
That's it. You got questions?
I think it's pretty important. This is only single phase too, right? as opposed to.
Yeah, this is single phase.
It's all single phase here, you guys are dealing with three-phase power most of the time, right?
Now, how much of a reserve does a transformer or panel or something? Because there's a guy down south of Cortez on a mine up in there.
Sorry, guys can answer it.
And that mine was shut down. I mean, they abandoned it, you know, just disassembled. But there's a set of transformer banks up in there, and the power had been cut off. The line was removed for like 3 years, and he went up and removed the transformer or something to do with the panel, and it killed him. But they said it reserved the charge in there for 3 years.
Might have been a capacitor.
Capacitor or something.
Yeah, yeah, that'll hold a charge.
But it was like 3 years. I did wonder if lightning hit it.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 years, charge it
Power
up there
factor
or something, you know, but yeah, it was like 3
Well,
years.
sometimes if the tanks of these aren't grounded, it'll be energized.
At least you can tell if it's good. Ain't a damn one of mine short.
I always let the son-in-law do stuff like that.
Since I'm on the board now, I guess I need to address that. I just want to ask, what size do I put that on?
Oh, we're doing more stuff?
Yeah, let's do good at time.
Is it melon? That's the reason our power dims in the winter when the line crew's out. They're out there eating their lunch.
Are there any other questions on safety or like the reclosure, how it resets and bumps 3 times before it opens up? Any questions on that? These are the guys that can answer it for you. Anything on safety?
We changed, or I have been changing fuses a lot inside the panel. And, you know, we always, check to see if the panel's warm and all before we open it up. But is there anything else that we need to be kind of cautious of when we open up that panel?
You might ask Mike that question. He's kind of the panel guy. He's wanting to know if there's anything he should look for before he goes up to the panel, opens the panel. He says they check it, make sure it's warm.
Yeah, check with the back of your hand and look around, see if there's anything like birds or anything dead on the ground right there. That'll be a good indication something's coming hot on there. But just use your side of your hand and stand off to the side when you do it, in case something does have a blow on it.
How about cleaning out stuff inside the panel once you get it open?
Yeah, if you guys need to clean them out or get in there, either call in and check with the line crew or something, see if that panel's dead. Then go out and you can probably set up a time when we gotta pull the fuses for you.
Yeah, if we're out there, just flag us down.
Well,
We'll for you.
to check from the meter down to the top of the circuit breaker in the panel, or you gotta pull a meter out? Or I guess you can pull the cutout.
Yeah, we'll just pull the cutout and then that'll be dead.
Yeah, one other thing add to what you say, if you go ahead and open the panel, look at that circuit breaker and make sure it's off, because my neighbor didn't. And he's blowing that thing off and was shocked.
Yeah, some of those breakers are in upside down. Those guys will put them in upside down, just because of space. So pay attention when you're in there, see if it says off or on.
Well, and that little rod that goes from the shutoff on the outside of the panel to the mechanism inside, that set screw will come loose and that'll come apart, and the handle will still work, but it ain't flipping the breaker off inside.
But yeah, if you guys need to work on them inside there, holler, somebody will probably show them off there.
More questions?
Yeah,
you guys gonna join us for lunch? If you have more questions,
yeah,
you can ask them over lunch. They're just about ready? Okay.